Hello, very good morning. Today in our class we are going to see the topics hardware and software and importance of BIOS. So in our topic, our subtopic is define PC hardware and software and state the importance of BIOS. So under the subject computer hardware and system administration, and topic is understand PC hardware and its components. So today we are going to start a new chapter. The new chapter is understand PC hardware and its components. So in this new chapter, our topic is define PC hardware and software and state the importance of BIOS. So we will see what is meant by hardware and definition of hardware, what is meant by software and also definition of software, and also we see the importance of BIOS, basic input output system. So we are going to see about this. So first, hardware. In the context of technology, especially in computer technology, hardware refers to the physical elements that make up a computer or electronic system and everything else involved that is physically tangible. And this hardware includes the monitor, hard drive, memory, and the CPU. Hardware works hand in hand with firmware and software to make a computer function. So we can say all the physical parts, all the physical elements, all the physical components of that make up a computer or an electronic system is called hardware. So we can say the physical components of a computer which we can see and also touch. Hardware always we can touch. We can see the parts and also we can see the components. So that is hardware. So without any hardware, the computer would not exist. So all the physical components of the computer referred as hardware, what we can see and touch. Hardware is an encompassing term that refers to all the physical parts that computer make up a computer. The internal hardware devices that make up the computer and ensure that it is functional are called components, while external hardware devices that are not essential to the computer's functions are called peripherals. So, the physical components of the computer are referred as hardware. There are again internal hardware devices that make up the computer. Generally, those are in computer case. And also external hardware devices that are not essential to computer functions. So generally, the internal hardware devices maximum make up the computer and also essential to computer's function, whereas external hardware devices are not much essential to a computer's functions. So the internal hardware devices are called components, whereas external hardware devices are called peripherals. So together, external hardware and also internal hardware together, they all fall under the category of computer hardware. So here we can see the different parts or components. Some are external, some are internal. So these are the internal components inside the computer: power supply, DVD-ROM drive, main board or system board, CPU and CPU fan, RAM, random access memory, VGA card, virtual graphics adapter used for display. This is sound card, this is hard disk drive, and reader all in one internal. So in the computer case, all are internal parts. These are all are internal parts. That's why these are called hardware components. Whereas these are the monitor, mouse, keyboard, speaker, and printer. If we have, these are all external to the computer. So that's why these are called peripherals. Here also we can see some other devices: system, fan, floppy disk drive, heatsink, hard disk drive, optical drive, RAM modules, central processing unit, motherboard, and power supply. And so these are called hardware, system hardware. So internal hardware examples we can see like this, we can give like this: central processing unit, drive. It means it may be Blu-ray drive, CD-ROM drive, DVD drive, floppy disk drive, hard disk drive, and also solid state drive. These are all comes under hard drives. Fan, this is also called heatsink, and modem, modulated and demodulated. Motherboard, here modem can be maximum internal, and sometimes we can also connect as external device. Motherboard, network card, power supply, random access memory, sound card, and video card. These are all possible maximum. All the devices can be inside the computer system. These are called internal hardware and also components. So here we can see at a glance different types of internal hardware. Here we have different RAMs, notebook RAM and desktop RAMs. Here we can see these are all RAMs, and these are different types of hard disk drives. And here we have different types of I/O ports, input and output ports, and these are different types of sockets, and these are the different types of power cable connectors used for motherboard, hard disk drives, and DVD drives, and floppy disk drive, etc. And different types of connectors here. Here we can see the processor card test, processor card sockets, and desktop card slots. Here peripheral cards. So different internal computer hardware we can see here. So external hardware examples: flat monitor, flat panel monitor, and normal monitor, and LCD monitor, and gamepad, joystick, keyboard, microphone, mouse, printer, projector, scanner, speakers, USB thumb drives, and etc. These are all peripheral devices because these all devices are connected to the computer base externally. So these are external. These are called external hardware. So all these hardware devices are designed to either provide instruction to the software or render results from its execution. It means these generally all these external hardware maximum these are called input and output devices. So this may give instruction to the software from input device, and or it can get results from output. So these are the examples for external hardware. So common hardware in a computer, generally in a computer we can find processor, that is also called CPU, central processing unit, one or more fans and heatsink, motherboard that most likely has an integrated video card, sound card, and a network card. For most desktop computers, especially gaming computers, a separate video card is used. Next common hardware is random access memory, hard disk drive, power supply, cables that connect internal components and external peripherals, keyboard, mouse are touched with a touchpad with a laptop, flat panel, monitor or TV for desktop computers, and LCD as part of laptop. So nowadays LED is coming. So these are all common hardware can be found in a computer. Examples hardware we can include input devices. These input devices are maximum a keyboard and mouse. This keyboard is called a standard input device. So mouse is a pointing device. Output device is printer and monitor. So my here monitor is called standard output device always. And different types of printers are available in the market. Based on the requirement, we purchase the printer. And the second storage devices are called hard disk drive, CD-ROM drive, and DVD drive. And internal components are central processing unit, motherboard, random access memory, and etc. These are the examples for hardware. So here also we can see different components in hardware. There is a cable, power cable. They connect into motherboard, use it to connect the motherboard. And this one is also called power cable, use it to connect floppy disk drive and hard disk drive. This supports a power supply to the hard disk drive and floppy disk drive. And this is a data cable, flat ribbon data cable used for floppy disk drive and also hard disk drive. The CD-ROM drive is mouse and USB port enabled wires. And this RAM and the CPU. These are inside hard disk. The inside parts of the hard disk is a BIOS card and this keyboard. So here we can see hardware. These are all called hardware. These called because these are physical in nature. We can see and touch. So now, so far we have seen what is hardware. Now we are going to see software. Software, in its most general sense, is a set of instructions or programs instructing to a computer to do specific tasks. Software is a generic term used to describe computers' programs that run on PCs, mobile phones, tablets, or other smart devices. Software is often used to describe all the functional aspects of a computer that do not refer to its physical components or hardware. Scripts, applications, programs, and a set of instructions are all terms often used to describe software. Everything that runs on a computer, from an operating system to a diagnostic tool and video game or application, can be defined as a software. So we can say software can be defined as a set of instructions that perform specific tasks. So here, everything that runs on a computer, from an operating system to a diagnostic tool. So everything is software because it is in the form of instructions. The theory of software first proposed by Alan Turing in the year 1935 and his essay Computable Numbers with an Application to Einstein's problems. However, the word software was coined by mathematician statistician John Tukey in the year 1958 in an issue of American Mathematical Monthly, in which he discussed electronic calculators programs. So this was the origin of the word software, the theory of software. The first proposed by Alan Turing in the year 1935. Later in the year 1958, the word software used in John Tukey's monthly magazine, American Mathematical Monthly, in which he discussed electronic calculators programs. Software can be difficult to describe because it is virtual and are not physical like computer hardware. So software is not physical, that's why we cannot see. So it is in the form of instructions, that too in the form of 0 and 1 language. So we cannot see it and we cannot touch it. It's virtual. Instead, software consists of line code written by computer programmers that have been compiled into a computer program. Software programs are stored as binary data that is copied to a computer's hard drive when it is installed. Since software is virtual and does not take up any physical space, it is much easier and often cheaper to upgrade than computer hardware. So there are two types of software available: system software and application software. The system software is a collection of programs designed to operate control and extend the processing capabilities of the computer itself. The system software is generally prepared by the computer manufacturers. These software products comprise of programs written in low-level languages which interact with the hardware at a very basic level. System software serves as the interface between the hardware and the end users. Some examples of system software are operating system, compilers, interpreters, assemblers, and etc. So these system software like operating system, compilers, interpreters, or assemblers are used to maintain the system. So extend the processing capacity, everything can be functional, everything can be controlled by this system software. So the best example for a system software is operating system, which is used to maintain the computer. Next type of software is application software. The software which is developed for a specific application is called application software. Application software products are designed to satisfy a particular need of a particular environment. All software applications prepared in the computer lab can come under the category of application software. Application software may consist of a single program such as Microsoft's Notepad for writing and editing a simple text. It may also consist of a collection of programs often called a software package which work together to accomplish a task such as spreadsheet package. So application software is developed for a specific application. Based on our application requirement, we will develop a software that is called application software. Here we can say the examples of application software, payroll software, because this payroll software is specially designed for generating the payrolls of employees in an organization. So it is an application software. Student record software, everything is recorded in the computers, in the college computers. So that is also called uh, student record software. And inventory management software, income tax software, railways reservation software. So everywhere now the online reservation is going on for railways. Next software is Microsoft Office Suite software, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint. These all are comes under application software. So in a nutshell, without software, a computer won't perform any function and will simply be a useless, inert machine. Different types of software also exist in direct mutual relations. For example, an application software which such as a word processing software cannot work unless an operating system runs it. And the operating system cannot be developed unless a programming software is used in the first place. So these are direct relations among all the software. Software needs to be installed before it can function, usually by copying it on a computer or smartphone drive for a physical support, that is nothing but CD or DVD, floppy disk, and etc., or by downloading it over the internet. The relation between hardware and software, we can say like this. Without software, there is no use of hardware. So meaning of this is when we purchase hardware, the computer without any software in it, so there is no use of the hardware. So without software, there is no use of hardware. And now without hardware, we cannot work with the software. So as per this sentence, if we have purchased hardware, if there is no software at all, there is no use. And if we have purchased software and there is no hardware, how can we work with the software? We cannot work. So that's why to work with the hardware, work with the software, we require the hardware. So these are so correlated. That means without software there is no use of hardware. Without hardware we cannot work with the software. And hardware and software are both are dependent on each other, and thus neither software nor hardware could, could alone serve the purpose of doing the task. So both are important in computer terminology. Computer field, hardware and software is required, where hardware refers physical components of computer, software refers in set of instructions. So if there is no software, so no use of hardware. If there is no hardware, we cannot work with the software. So this is the basic idea of the relation between hardware and software. So if we see the differences between these two, hardware is a physical parts, computer that causes processing of data. Software is a set of instructions that tells a computer exactly what to do. It is hardware is manufactured, software is developed and engineered. Hardware cannot perform any task without software. As hardware are physical electronic devices. We can see and touch hardware. It has four main categories: input device, output device, storage, and internal components. Software cannot be executed without hardware. We can see and also use the software, but we cannot actually touch them. Hardware has more of four main categories: input device, output device, storage, internal components. Software is mainly divided into system software, programming software, and application software. Hardware is not affected by computer viruses. Software is affected by computer viruses. It cannot be transferred from one place to another electrically through a network in case of hardware, but it can be transferred in case of software. If hardware is damaged, it is replaced with new one. If software is damaged, its backup copy can reinstalled. Hardware examples are keyboard, mouse, monitor, printer, CPU, hard disk drive, RAM, ROM, and etc. So examples in software: MS Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Photoshop, MySQL, etc. So these are the different importances of differences between hardware and software. So now we will see the importance of BIOS. Before that, we will see what is meant by BIOS, how it works. Then we will see the importance of BIOS. So BIOS is a term that stands for basic input and output systems. So BIOS stands for basic input and output systems. BIOS is really the link between hardware and software in a system. Most people know the term BIOS by another name: reverse drivers or just drivers. What can be confusing is that some of the BIOS is burnt or flashed into a ROM chip that is both non-volatile and it does not get erased and the power is turned off and read only. The BIOS also includes ROM chips installed in adapter cards as well as all additional drivers loaded when the system boots up. So BIOS, the term stands for basic input output system. Here we can see the computer BIOS, AMI BIOS, high integrated circuit in motherboard. This is also BIOS installed on the motherboard directly, mounted on the motherboard. So here we can see the BIOS features. When we open the BIOS settings in the computer, first ever screen is called Phoenix Award Brand. This BIOS is manufactured by Phoenix company. These are the options available: standard CMOS features, advanced BIOS features, advanced chipset features, integrated peripherals, power management setup, PNP and PCI configuration, PC health status. So these are the options available in BIOS settings. We can change the settings, CMOS or advanced BIOS setting and everything. But in olden days, this was a BIOS setting was very much essential before before turn on the computer. So while turn on the computer, if you want to enter the BIOS setup, you have to press Control or Delete or function key, and function key defined by the particular manufacturer. So now almost all systems are coming with the inbuilt facility and also plug and play facility. Whereas in the older systems, we must include and refer the maximum information in the form of BIOS. This is BIOS chip, and this is BIOS settings. So another BIOS IC is manufactured by Phoenix BIOS on the motherboard. In IBM PC compatible computers, the basic input and output system is also known as the system BIOS. The BIOS is boot firmware designed to be the first code run by a PC when powered on. The initial function of the BIOS is to identify, test, initialize system devices such as the video display card, hard disk, and floppy disk and other hardware. This is to prepare the machine into a known state so that software stored on the compatible media can be loaded, executed, and given control of the PC. This process is known as booting or booting up, which is short for bootstrapping. BIOS programs are stored on a chip and are built to work with various devices that make up the complementary chipset of the system. They provide small library of basic input-output functions that can be called to operate and control the peripherals, such as the keyboard, text display functions, and so forth. So BIOS generally stored in the form of IC, chip integrated circuit, with the BIOS generally stored by the computer manufacturer. So the basic function of the BIOS is whenever we switch on the computer, the first code run by the computer is BIOS. It starts running according to the instructions already stored as per the BIOS. The system works and starts accordingly. The combination of motherboard BIOS and the adapter card BIOS and the device drivers loaded from disk and previewed through BIOS as a whole. The portion of the BIOS contained in the ROM chips both on motherboard and in some adapter card is sometimes called firmware, which is a name given to software stored on a chip rather than a disk. In principle, the BIOS is in ROM was customized to the particular manufacturer's hardware, allowing low-level services such as reading a keystroke or writing a sector of data to a diskette. To be provided, keystroke or allowing low-level services in principle, the BIOS in ROM customized to the particular manufacturer's hardware, allowing low-level services to be provided in a standardized way to the operating system. Example, an IBM PC might have had either a microphone or a color display adapter using different display memory addresses and hardware, but the BIOS service to print a character on the screen in text mode would be the same. So BIOS in a PC personal computer comes from three possible sources, that is motherboard ROM, adapter ROM such as that found on a video card, loaded into RAM from hard disk drive, from disk drive, alternatively as drivers. So three possible occurs of ROM. A motherboard ROM BIOS is most often associated with hardware rather than software. This is because the BIOS on the motherboard is contained in a ROM chip on the motherboard, which contains the initial software drivers needed to get the system running. The motherboard BIOS usually includes drivers for all the basic system components, including the keyboard, floppy drive, hard drive, serial, and parallel ports, etc. As systems become more complex, new hardware was added for which no motherboard BIOS drivers existed. These includes devices such as power, newer video adapters, Celeno drives, SCSI hard disk, USB ports, and so on. BIOS hardware and software. Rather than requiring new motherboard BIOS that would specify support the new devices, it was far simpler and more practical to copy and any new drivers that were necessary up onto the system hard disk and configure the operating system, load them at boot time. Some drivers must be active during boot time. Example, how could you boot from a hard disk if the drivers necessary to make the disk interface work must be loaded from the disk? So like this, some drivers must become active during the booting time. Computer manufacturers designed the motherboard ROM to scan the slots looking for adapter cards with ROMs on them. If a card was found with a ROM on it, the ROM was executed during the initial system startup phase before the system began loading the operating system from the hard disk. So putting the ROM-based drivers right on the card, you did not have to change the motherboard ROM to have built-in support for new devices. A few cards or adapter boards must always have ROM on board, including the following. Video cards all have an onboard BIOS. The maximum video cards, VGA cards, are having onboard BIOS with them. SCSI adapters, small computer system interface. Those that support booting from SCSI drives and CD-ROMs have an onboard BIOS. Network interface cards also, those that support booting directly from a file server have what is usually called a boot ROM or IPL initial program load ROM on board. This enables PC to be configured on a LAN as diskless workstations, also called net PCs, and network cards, network computers, and even smart terminals. IDE or floppy upgrade boards, these boards that enable to attach more or different types of drives than what is normally supported by the motherboard alone. Y2K boards that importance incorporate BIOS fixes to update the century byte in the CMOS RAM. So now these Y2K boards are almost obsolete because the problem is solved. So BIOS and CMOS RAM. Some people confuse BIOS with the CMOS RAM in the system. CMOS RAM is complemented metal oxide semiconductor random access memory. And this confusion is aided by the fact that the setup program in the BIOS is used to set and store configuration settings in the CMOS RAM. They are in fact two totally separate components. So BIOS and CMOS RAM are separate components. BIOS is on the motherboard is stored in a fixed ROM chip. Also on the motherboard is a chip called the RTC or NVRAM chip, which stands for real-time clock or non-volatile memory. Although it is called non-volatile, it is actually volatile, meaning that without power, the time, date settings and the data in the RAM portion will in fact be erased. It is called non-volatile because it is designed using complementary metal oxide semiconductor technology, which results in a chip that runs on very little power. Here, a battery in the system rather than AC wall current provides the power. For CMOS battery, this is also called CMOS battery. This is also why most people incorrectly call this chip the CMOS RAM chip, although not technically accurate. That is easier to say than the RTC NVRAM chip. When we enter the BIOS setup, configure hard disk parameters or other BIOS setup settings, save them. These settings are written to the storage area in the RTC environment, otherwise called CMOS RAM. Every time the system boots up, it reads the parameters stored in the CMOS RAM chip to determine how the system would be configured. Relationship exists between the BIOS and CMOS RAM, but they are totally distinctly different parts of the system. So the BIOS is a collection of programs embedded on a chip design of the computer. The collection of programs is the first thing loaded when we start the computer, even before the operating system. Simply put, BIOS in the most PCs has four main functions. So it means when we switch on the computer, the first program loaded start working is BIOS. What are the instructions? Whatever the instructions stored in the BIOS, those are stored by the manufacturers. According to the instructions stored in the BIOS, the system work. So generally, the steps, the when we switch on the computer, every BIOS got main functions. These main functions are post, setup, bootstrap loader, BIOS. Here the first function is post, that is called power on self-test. The post tests the computer's processor, memory, chipset, video adapter, disk controllers, disk drives, keyboard, and other crucial components. So in this stage, when we switch on the computer, the BIOS checks all the devices first, whether they are in working condition or not. If any problem is there in case of any of the device in the computer, then it reports. So this is the power and self test. It tests all the devices maximum, computer processors, memory, chipset, video adapter, all the devices. If any error is occur during the power and self test, the computer automatically informs the user. Next step is net function is setup, the system configuration setup program. This is usually a menu driven program activated by pressing a special key during the post, which enables to configure the motherboard and chipset settings along with the date and time, password, disk drives, and other basic system settings. So we can set up some settings in this program, in this area. So whenever after simply turn on the system while post is going on, a special function maybe control or delete or any function key you press, the system automatically goes to the setup program. There we can change settings for like date and time, password and disk drives and everything. Next, bootstrap loader, a routine that reads the disk drives looking for a valid master boot sector. This master boot sector program then continues the boot process by loading an operating system boot sector, which then loads the operating system core files. So first, it BIOS function power on self-test. After ensuring all the devices are working properly, if we want, we can enter into the setup. We can change any settings, Android settings here. After that, a bootstrap loader comes into the picture. It finds the boot sector in the hard disk and it finds the operating system and starts loading to the RAM, that is called booting. So basic input output system, this refers to the collection of actual drivers used to act as basic interface between the operating system and hardware when the system is booted and running. So these are the main functions of a BIOS. Here we can see also shadow run. ROM holds the BIOS, host and the program to boot the drivers. ROM has a much longer access time than RAM, slowing down the system. If on boot up, the ROM is copied into RAM, the system now can access this fast RAM that is shadowing the slow RAM, considerably speeding up the overall system operation. So system BIOS shadowed and video BIOS also shadowed here. Here ROM BIOS starts first thing. There are four steps. Check all hardware, that is nothing but post, run boost program, read boot record and load IOCs. The first step, the instructions from the ROM BIOS CPU tests all hardware components. After all components post the system beeps once. And in the find boot record, then it goes to the hard disk and it finds the boot sector on the hard disk, and from BIOS instruct the CPU to look for the boot record and reads the boot record from the hard disk here and load the boot record, and then load IO.system, that is nothing but input output dot system, that is nothing but operating system file will be loaded to the RAM, then that is called booting. So here we can see the BIOS CMOS settings, BIOS settings screen. We can change standard CMOS features, advanced BIOS features, advanced chipset features, integrated peripheral power management setup. So all different settings are available in this. We can change according to our need. And also time, date, hard disk type also will be displayed here. So here also we can change time and date. So another BIOS setup utility. This is so by boot device priority we can change. Generally, the boot device priority is hard disk is the highest priority. When we there are it displays all the available disk drives, hard disk drive, floppy disk drives, and CD-ROM drive, etc. We can set to the boot device. Where it means that when we switch on the computer, the BIOS program automatically searches for operating system in that device. So here also another BIOS setup utility. So we can change the system date and system time and floppy diskette type and everything, floppy diskette A and floppy diskette B. And here there are no hard disks. If we connect hard disks, it will be displayed. Here the system memory is displayed here. So in advanced setup, some other options will be available, and security options, some other options will be available. In the boot option, some other options will be available. Based on our requirement, we can change the settings. This is the BIOS setup utility. Here in another BIOS setup utility. So now we have to see the importance of BIOS. The BIOS software has a number of different roles, but its most important role is to load the operating system. When we turn on a computer and the microprocessor tries to execute its first instruction, it has to get that instruction from somewhere. BIOS enables computers to perform certain operations as soon as they turn on. The principal job of computer's BIOS is to govern the early stages of the startup process, ensuring that the operating system is correctly loaded into the memory. So the main importance of the BIOS is that when we turn on the computer, it checks all the hardware whether they are working properly or not. If you want, we can change by entering into the setup. Then it checks for a hard disk, hard operating system where it is located, and load the operating system from the hard disk drive to RAM. That's the booting. BIOS is vital to the operation of most modern computers, and knowing some facts about it could help to troubleshoot issues with the mission. BIOS controls how computer starts up, makes sure that it is working properly, and serves as a gatekeeper for its various parts. BIOS are very important, as a primary function of the BIOS is to set up the hardware and load and start an operating system such as Windows, Macintosh, Linux, and etc. So this is importance of BIOS. So when we turn on the computer, the BIOS does several things. That it's a sequence, usual sequence. Check the CMOS setup for custom settings. Load the interrupt handlers and device drivers. Initialize registers and power management. Perform the power on self-test. Display system settings. Determines which devices are bootable. Initiate the boot stop sequence. So these are the sequence of things when we turn off the computer, BIOS does in any computer. So functions of BIOS here, PC post is called power on self-test. This tests the computer hardware and makes sure no error exists before loading the operating system. Additional information on the host is available on our host and B.Vajraiah page. Bootstrap loader, locate the operating system. If a capable operating system is located, the BIOS will pass control to it. BIOS drivers, low-level drivers that give the computer basic operational control over computer's hardware. BIOS setup or CMOS setup, configuration program that allows to configure hardware settings, including system settings such as computer passwords, time, and date. These are the functions of BIOS. So, flowchart of BIOS function, if you see, turn on computer, pass through, post error free. If post is not passed, I mean if any errors occur here, it will output to the monitor. The display, here the system display types of errors by giving some beep codes or some error codes in the monitor. So here itself we have to rectify all the errors displayed by the post, nothing but hardware errors displayed by the post. So after rectifying it, again we have to turn on the computer. So pass through the post error free, yes, then it checks plug and play, and next test boot drive, and nothing but searches for boot drive where operating system is loaded, and then it finds a bootable media found and media unfound. If bootable media not found, nothing but operating system not found, pass through post errors. Here also after plug and play test boot drive. If after testing boot drive, it searches for bootable media, that is nothing but operating system. If operating system is not found, nothing but bootable media not found, then pass through post error free again, and then no, then again it go to the error free and available for the hard disk drive or floppy disk drive, and we have to set boot drive here. We have to load the operating system in this, and if bootable media found, load the boot program, that is nothing, load the operating system, nothing like starting the operating system and working of the system. So these are the flowchart for BIOS functions. So popular BIOS manufacturers are, we can see, Finance Technologies, IBM International Business Mission, Dell Computers, Gateway, BioSoft, and American Mega Friends AMI, and Inside Software. Among these, AMI and Onyx Technologies are famous for manufacturing BIOSes. So far in this class we have seen what is hardware and what is software, types of software, and what are the hardware devices used in the computer. And also we have discussed about BIOS, basic input-output system, and importance of the BIOS, functions of the BIOS, and manufacturers of the BIOS. In this class we have discussed all of this. Thank you.